Podcasters are not good at making lists. They're not good at driving traffic. They're not good at it because there's a huge hurdle, and that is the person listening is in their car on the freeway. They're not at their computer. They got double headphones on while mowing the lawn, or they're at the gym. So getting them to remember to go later, to go download something, to get on a list, that's like a different hurdle.
So today we're talking to Dan R. Morris, and Dan and I actually have a really cool gift for you to check out. Dan's actually the mastermind behind it. Our team is just helping pitch into the amazing offer that he's put together called the Podcaster's Kit. Dan, could you tell everyone listening a little bit more about it?
Yeah, man, I would love to. If you're remotely interested in podcasting, or you actually have a podcast and you like to get better, we thought there would be no better method to be able to accomplish your goals than by taking like the best people in the industry and their greatest course, their knowledge, and bundling them together. And we took 41 podcasting experts and their course or their training, and we put them into one bundle that we call Podcaster's Kit. And the hard part about podcasting is not necessarily the recording. It's the stuff, it's the learning curve to it. Right. It's like this little things, it's the tech on the backside, or it's the understanding of the different ways that you could monetize, or even knowing that there's a way that you could actually enhance your voice. You could change kind of the way that you project for your podcast. But all of those things, most of the time, take $199 a course, or $79 or $299. And for most people, that's just not doable. So we took 41 courses and put them all together, and then we sell the Podcaster's Kit for 1 week a year for only $47, which to me is crazy. And I would love to be able to sell it for $27, but we actually have enough expenses and things that are associated with putting it together that the lowest we can do it is $47. But for you, that means like $4,900 worth of podcasting knowledge, like an encyclopedia of podcasting, for $47, and then you can binge listen to it at night. It's not like a summit. You got to show up on October 3rd at 4 p.m. and watch till 6. You could watch it at 3 a.m. You could download some of the stuff you could listen to in your car. I mean, you could become an expert in podcasting in basically a week, and everything you would need to know. So for 1 week a year, which is this week, we put Podcaster's Kit available, and we're very excited to bring it to you.
Our flagship course, Podcast Influencer Formula, is one of the courses in there. We're in great company. Like Dan said, it's like over 40 trainings for $47. It's insane. So pick it up. We'll have a link in the show notes, but enough of the promotion. Let's talk about your story, Dan. You actually have a podcast called Tracing the Path, and I was listening to it this morning. It's actually pretty cool for a history podcast. I'm not normally super into history, but with headlines like how the Supreme Court created Disney Plus and HBO Max, it really caught my eye at first. That was the first thing to catch my eye. But as I was listening, the production quality and the scripts really kept me wondering how all the random and interesting historical dots connected. So for everyone listening, could you tell us a little bit more about Tracing the Path, what it is, who it's for, and why you created it?
Sure. Let me start with why I created it. When I was, I'm 48 years old, so I say when I was younger, but there was a guy named Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey was probably the most famous radio personality in the history of time. He was on every station in America for a while, and he had this show. Not only did he do the news, but he had this show called The Rest of the Story. And his son wrote this show. And the idea of it was he would start to tell a story. Maybe he might tell a story about little Jack when he was 9, did something, won some chess tournament, saved a woman from a sinking ship, and then became an Eagle Scout, and then learned to fly a plane by himself, and then, saved the president from being assassinated. And then at the very end of the story, he would tell you the name of the person. So maybe little Jack was John F. Kennedy.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're listening to this story, and for me, it was the only thing that would keep me in my car. Like I could be going to a meeting, it could be the meeting that makes or breaks my career. And I could get to the meeting, and if the story wasn't over, even if I was late, it was like, I am not getting out of this car. I will lose my job before I fail to hear the end of this story.
Wow.
So for me, Paul Harvey was this crazy thing that back, I mean, it's only like 20 years, but back 20 or 30 years ago, if there was a show on television and you missed it, like you missed it. Like you didn't get a chance to see it again. So if you didn't hear the end of Paul Harvey's story, like there was no other place to go. You just would never know. So for me, 12:35 p.m. when the rest of the story came on radio, uh, that was, that was, I don't know, somehow that was just powerful for me. And I didn't really even consider the power of it at the time, nor did I consider it maybe for another 10 years, but there came a point when I just really missed that moment. I missed that story, and he would draw you in and you would just be filled with wonder. And I loved hearing the end, and I kind of wanted to share with my kids, but there wasn't really anything like it. So, I found some old Paul Harvey episodes, but with an old Paul Harvey episode comes the level of audio. So, it's a little bit hissy, or it's a little bit, it's got that sound in the background that comes with, and pretty much I think the only way that you can find it is somebody recorded it from their radio. And then ended up putting it on YouTube. So it's not like Paul Harvey Jr. remastered them or anything. So letting my kids listen to them, not only were the stories more about John F. Kennedy and John Wayne and some of those people that the young generation today doesn't connect with, but the sound of it just didn't excite them. It wasn't YouTube fast. My wife and I, Rachel, we started our own podcast, which we did maybe 300 episodes, called Amplify Today. And we did that 5 years ago, and it was all about social media tech news. And, it was pretty popular. It was a good show. Got some awards and stuff. But it wasn't this thing inside of me. It wasn't compelling. Like why would you want to go back and listen to an episode about Ello, the social media site that never became anything? Like we did an episode on Ello, but Ello's not a thing now. So why would you go back and listen to those unless you wanted to hear the history of social media, at the time? So I decided, you know what? I'm going to do a show like Paul Harvey. Like his was taking this one person and telling you about that life. And I was more interested in the things that connected to that life. So I actually did the story of Paul Harvey. And in that story, I found really fascinating things. Like he had a hunch before World War II, reading news reports about the U.S. moving boats over to Hawaii. He had this hunch that something was going on in Hawaii. And so he convinced the local newspaper and the radio station that he worked for to fund him to go live in Hawaii and figure out what was going on. Like he was going to report from there. And he was there every day in 1943 for 9 months trying to figure out what was happening. And he left on December 5th, 1941. He left December 5th, 1941, when he and his wife decided that nothing was going on, and they got on a ship that took 2 days to get to California. And while on the ship, Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Oh my God. I just got chills.
Yeah, like that story just made me think, holy moly, that is crazy. And so that, and then you find out that he gets a job in Chicago, and then he ends up working with all of these other people who became famous. They were all young nobodies at one point, but then they all became famous. Like Harry Carey became the voice of the Cubs, and everybody in Chicago knows Harry Carey. There's a Harry Carey restaurant, and they know that he was the commentator for the Cubs for years, and he was a friend of Paul Harvey. But anyway, I like to to tell these stories where you connect all of these things that like what Pearl Harbor is, but then you connect it, and you might know who Paul Harvey is, but then you connect the two, like, oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And you listen to the episode about Disney Plus and the Supreme Court. In that particular case, what I learned was in the 1940s, Paramount and NBC and Columbia, they all decided they wanted to own not only the movie production and the movie distribution, but they wanted to own the theaters. So they actually owned like 85% of the theaters in the US.
Wow.
Which meant that if you weren't a big name director or producer who went through one of the big studios, like Universal wasn't going to play your movie at one of their studios. They're going to play Universal movies.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court actually shut them down and said, you can't own theaters. And then it wasn't until about 4 years ago when the government was looking at old Supreme Court cases that didn't have an expiration date, where the verdict still existed. Like they still were not allowed to own distribution. They weren't allowed to own theaters. So they just were looking at it, and then they realized we're no longer in the same economy that we were in the 40s. Like now there's Netflix, there's all these other places that people can watch movies, and independents can definitely get their movie made. So they rescinded all of the restrictions. And the restrictions, the way they were written, were basically like, you can't own your own TV channel that would have your own movies, because that's like owning a theater. Wow. So as soon as the Supreme Court lifted that, Disney was like, hey, let's make our own program. We're allowed to now. So Disney Plus came about. But that's just not something you normally think about in the course of time. So the idea of tracing the path is things that you thought you knew, but you really didn't. This is the concept. And we're excited about it, It's like the thing that makes me most excited every month is to do a new episode. Like right now I'm working on Dracula
for Halloween.
For Halloween. I wanted to do something Halloweenish, and I lived in Romania, where Transylvania is. And I know that Romanians could care less about Dracula because he came from England, this author named Bram Stoker. But then to know that Bram Stoker actually hobnobbed with some of the presidents and some of the stuff that, with other people that you know in history, and the idea of how Dracula then came about, and then the movies that came from that, just to me, all that stuff is just so interesting. And if you end up listening to all of the episodes, because they're all the 20th century, most of them start way back, but they're all somehow how the 20th century ends up being the way it is. You'll just see all these connections between episodes, and you think, whoa, I remember that. Like Jackie Robinson was also in Hawaii when Paul Harvey was in Hawaii, and actually left Hawaii the day Paul Harvey left Hawaii. Were they on the same ship?
Wow.
Okay. I don't know. I'm looking into that. Is it possible? There's a picture of them before Jackie Robinson was famous. Is it possible that he's in a picture on that ship, just in the background?
What goes into selecting these topics? Like, how do you have such a perfect and interesting story just ready to be like all the dots connected?
Dude, it's like 4 days of research. And the stories mostly are things that I've always been interested in. So, for instance, I'm a Star Wars fan. And when I was in fourth grade, I lived in Alaska. And my fourth grade teacher let us listen to the Star Wars the Star Wars story was produced as a radio drama with George Lucas and UCLA. And they produced 11 hours reading George Lucas's original script. And it has Mark Hamill, it has C-3PO. I mean, it's got some of the characters from the movie are actually reading the parts. It's amazing production quality. It sounds like a movie. So in fourth grade, I grew up listening to that, and I have it. I've got it. I've got it on a hard drive. I listened to it. I shared it with my kids, and I realized, like, this is one of those things in life where I got to figure out what are all the details. Like, how did George Lucas and UCLA, like, how did that happen? What are the players that were involved? Why wasn't Han Solo as part of the process? And it was because he was making Raiders of the Lost Ark. But just these things that have happened to me in my life is how I've started. And then last month we did the history of pizza. which I just started watching on this cooking show. Somebody went to Naples and they were talking about pizza, and the lady said this one thing, and this is what made me decide to do the episode that very next day. She said, "Did you know that the cholera epidemic in like 1907 in Naples is what created the pizza that we have now in Naples? Because they had unsanitary conditions, and the only thing they could rely on was wine that was bottled and deep frying their food. So they started deep frying their pizza dough. So they have fried pizza dough in Naples, and that thing that came out of cholera became what we now know as pizza. But I instantly thought, cholera, COVID, what a cool connection for an episode. And then I found out that on March 27th of 2020, COVID was the first time in the city of Naples that they shut down all of the pizza restaurants for 27 days. So I have like this big story arc between cholera and COVID and the invention of, or the creation of pizza and Queen Margarita and how it became known as a margarita pizza, and then how the mob was involved, like Al Pacino, and well, not Al Pacino, but Al Capone. Oh, just dude, it's just cool stuff, man.
Oh my God. Like you're just blowing my mind. Like this feels like all just random stuff, but it makes sense as you're explaining
it. Yeah, Al Capone, his parents lived in Naples. They left Naples because of the cholera epidemic. They settled in New York. They end up settling in Chicago, and in their strange family lore, only their family, their strange family lore, the daughter, Mafalda, she owns a restaurant in Chicago. Somebody comes in and asks her for the recipe for her lasagna sauce, and the Capones believe that the person that asked is the person who made ragu. Like, that's like deeply ingrained in Capone family history.
Wow.
It's not at all true, but I just thought it was a cool like connection. And then we started the story of ragu because they also came from Naples. But it just ends up being a really interesting episode about pizza.
Well, let's pivot to a second. In my research for this episode, I heard that you only work 4 months a year, and I can't say I'm there personally yet. But we're both very blessed to do what we do for a living. And this past 2 years have really shown a lot of people that it is possible to turn your craft into a career. And you were saying that it was taking like 4 days or more to just create the stories for these episodes, on top of running your different businesses, your different podcasts, working for the podcast magazine. I just want to really dive into this idea of how practically and tangibly people can begin turning their craft into their career, if not like specifically around podcasting.
Sure. So it's true and it's not true that we work 4 months a year. It's definitely true and not true. As weird as that sounds. Rachel and I have been working online, solely online, for 8 years now. We haven't had a job. Rachel runs findingjoy.net, which is a big motherhood site. She's got like 800,000 fans on Facebook, and she's been on Today Show, and she got a book deal with Penguin Random House, and I think she's got another one coming up. And that site has, that site creates some revenue, and it's a good. I mean, for her, it's kind of a, once you turn social media on, you can't turn it off. So for her, findingjoy.net is a daily chore. But the revenue comes from 2 projects. We do a project in June that's just like Podcaster's Kit, but it's for digital marketing, and it's called BC Stack. And we do one in October called Podcaster's Kit. And our revenue for the year comes from these 2 products. So we spend about 2 months working on the products each. And if that's all we did every year, then we would be fine. Like that would be and it's really BC Stack, because that thing sells like 20,000 units. What goes into that, creating that, because that's year 8, is taking shiny button syndrome and putting it on the back burner. And I think for the first 5 years, I had many epiphanies. I remember many Facebook posts where I said, "Hey, I got clarity today. I exactly know, and I have an idea of where I'm headed, what I'm doing. And as I look back at those in the early years, I had a travel site at one point. I had a wine site at one point. I had Letters from Dan, which is my own personal blog. We did blogging workshops around the world for a while. We did speaking all over the place. Like we did all these things that in my mind were all working towards something. But that was all in my mind. They were all working towards something. But I didn't know what the towards was. I just knew, okay, speaking is probably good for our business. Doing workshops is good for our business. Selling BC Stack is good for our business. Blog posts is good for our business. They all have this feeling of trajectory that the boat is moving forward. But in reality, the boat is just moving because there wasn't an end goal. There was just, let's just keep moving. Let's speak at this conference because somebody there might see us. We might get clients there. We'll speak at this conference. We'll write this blog post. We'll create this product. We'll create this Facebook group. We're growing this thing, but the thing, it really is just a thing. And it wasn't until the second year of BC Stack where it grew 10% because I had an idea of how I could do it better that I realized, what if I just focused on this one thing? What if I said no to some of these speaking engagements? What if I said no to being on these podcasts? Because I've been on a lot of podcasts. I've talked about our business, talked about, hey, you could find me on Twitter, you could find me on Instagram, whatever, at the end of the podcast. But I've been on Entrepreneur on Fire a couple times. It's a big show with a big audience. But without a clear end, everything that you do and everything that you talk about doesn't have a focus. So once I realized I could make BC Stack really big if I just focused on it, then all of a sudden when I'm on a podcast and I'm talking about BC Stack, but I'm talking about it in November, which is nowhere near June when it comes out, then I know that the focus of this particular podcast interview is for me to talk about getting new contributors, new people that would be in it. And if it's in May, then I'm talking about getting it, getting on the list to hear about it because it's coming out in a month. And like all of a sudden, everything that I did, I could actually attribute to one single thing and that is, how can I sell 100,000 units of BC Stack? Like, how do I get to that point? And that's my current goals. How do I sell 100,000 units in 1 week of that product? And, we're in the 20s. So I'm on the right path because every year we've grown 15, 20%. But every year I find out something that I did wrong or I didn't do right or I didn't think through or I missed an opportunity and I can add it to the next year. So now I'm to the point where I can just work on BC Stack and Podcaster's Kit. I could do 2 months and 2 months. And then the rest of the year, we could play with the kids, But so that's the 4 months part. That's where the revenue comes from. But then the podcast, I really love it. That's just my thing. I love I don't make any money from it. I don't monetize it. I don't do anything. I just like to tell stories. So I work a lot more than 4 months a year. But I guess you would say for fun, like the podcast for me is, I just want to do it. And then Rachel really likes her motherhood family at Finding Joy. And, the book deals they pay 6 figures. But that 6 figures we found out the very first time was pretty much because Rachel couldn't work for 6 months. She had to write the book. So you're living off the advance, really. It's not like you get rich on advance. Like you're just living off of it because you can't work on your site. You can't do all the stuff. And then your audience starts to go away because now you're not writing as much. And it's almost like, do I really want to write a book? Because some other things take a back burner and I can't really stop the momentum. So yeah, we work more than 4 months a year, but we're definitely to the point where financially that's all we would have to do. And sort of getting to that point where that's all I want to do, except for the podcast. Like I don't do any client stuff. I don't do anything that actually has an appointment or a date or a deadline or a due date or relies on someone. I don't want that ever. You know what? I also learned this at one point in time. I was helping clients turn websites into six-figure websites. And then somebody said, how come you're not doing that for your own websites? Why am I not doing that for my own
Exactly.
websites?
Yeah.
That is what I need to be doing. So I did. I said, you know what? I'm going to do that for Stack. I'm going to just do all the things I used to do for other people. I'm going to hire myself, tell myself the stuff I would have told someone else, and then I'm going to make a checklist and go through those things.
So you would say that the secret to working less is focusing more.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Which is 1,000% easier to say than it is to do. So I want to flip this on its head and ask you about sort of the journey up until this point. I know it couldn't have just been a switch, like it had to have been a lot of trial and error and figuring it out to get to this point, because for a lot of people listening, you might have traction in your business. You might be making money online, but you're not quite there where you really have that free time to enjoy your family, travel, create the podcast of your dreams or anything like that. Besides the kind of glamorous bit at the end of working the 4 months out of the year, what led up to that?
There was a lot of months where you would take client work to pay the bills. I'll say that. There's a lot of months where you're excited about something. An opportunity comes, you get a big client, you make a bunch of money. But, in that first podcast I was telling you about, Amplify Today, when we stopped that, which Rachel didn't really want to stop, she really liked it. It was because of that Elo episode. I couldn't get my head around the idea of how do I market that old episode? How do I get any traction out of this work that I did for half an hour in 2018? And I realized I can't market the Elo episode. Nobody cares. Then I thought, why am I doing this podcast? If I can't leverage what I'm doing for 2 years from now, nobody watches yesterday's 6 o'clock news.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody. And I know there's entire businesses built on news and current events and all that stuff. But for me, I couldn't figure out why. There is no snowball that is growing, that is rolling when you do some current events thing. Because I want there to be 100 listeners of today's show, and then a year from now, having 1,000 new listeners listen to the show. I want that activity to build. When I was thinking about the Elo thing, it really brought to the forefront the idea that the client work was the same way. The moment the client work dries up is the moment the game is over. And I didn't like that either. That is not what I should be doing. Because you get a client for a month, you get a mastermind person for 6 months. Great, you get a 6-month mastermind client. But then what happens after that? You need more mastermind clients. It's it never ends. It's a hamster wheel. So I really started to think about, we got to do things that can build. And that first BC Stack, I was like, we could do this again. And all those people that bought that last year, if I treat them right, I could get them to buy it this year. I don't have to recapture them. I don't have to go out and get 20,000 people every year. I can take last year's people and sell them this year's product. And then I can spend my time getting 20,000 new people. So now I have 40,000 people. And if all I did was get 20,000 new people a year, then the snowball would grow. That's all I have to do. Keep the old people and just get new people. And then I can keep growing the thing. And if I can keep them interested in this product of BC Stack, if I could be so good as to find 80, or what do we have there? We have 65 people in BC Stack. So I try to get 85% new contributors that nobody's ever heard of before. Because I want them to be excited about Dr. Terry Fisher from Canada, who teaches you how to get your blog on Alexa. That's not a course you come across every day. But if I can keep bringing them new stuff, then instead of making the product the snowball, I could make the audience the snowball. And to me, the audience then became the asset, not the stack. So if I could go on podcasts to grow that audience and get them in, then every year it would get bigger and my job would get easier. And pretty soon I won't have to get any new people. Like I can
Just
let the old
build, yeah.
people get the new people. And then all I have to do is put it together, which is where I am now. All I have to do is put it together. And then the audience snowball is actually one that brings all the traffic. We have 800 affiliates now for Stack. So I'll let them do the work. Let them go out and get new audiences, and then I'll just figure out how to pay them a lot. So the snowball grows.
That's awesome. And this has been the same story for Podcasters Kit too?
Podcasters Kit is the same story with some mistakes.
Okay.
So we did BC Stack for 5 years when I thought, you know what, let's do 2 of these a year. That would be good. I'll do something related. Like that's digital marketing. And there was always like a podcast product in it. But then I thought, well, I'm really into podcasting now. Yeah. I'll just do a podcast one. And then I'll take the same mindset that I had with BC Stack and I'll bring it to Podcasters Kit. And that was my mistake number 1. And that mistake was thinking that a big percentage of the digital marketing audience would want a podcast. Mistake number 1. Podcasting has its own like hunchback to it. When people hear about it, it's not like, do you want to learn how to write a blog post? Like, yeah, that'll help me. But, with podcasting, it's like, oh, that's something I have to do every week or all the time. Like, that's an entirely new commitment to the business. So not everyone from the old audience was interested in taking on this brand new commitment, which was not necessarily a mistake, but definitely a smaller percentage than I originally anticipated. The mistake was I get 41 contributors in the Podcasters Kit. I get 65 into BC Stack. The contributors in BC Stack are bloggers, digital marketers, people with lists who help promote it. Podcasters are not good at making lists. They're not good at driving traffic to their website to download something. They're not good at it because there's a huge hurdle, and that is the person listening is in their car on the freeway.
Yeah,
they're not at their computer. They got double headphones on while mowing the lawn, or they're at the gym. So getting them to remember to go later to go download something to get on a list, that's like a different hurdle. So now I've got 41 people in the kit who don't have a list. This was my like eye-opening the very first year was, oh, these guys can promote on social and they can promote in these different places, but largely none of them have 1 million people on a list, of which several people at BC Stack have 1 million or 2 million. So the first year was like, oh, well, that wasn't quite 20,000 units. That was more like 4,000 units. Oh, that's smaller. It's considerably smaller. So I have now been teaching podcasters how to grow lists, because if I can teach them how to grow lists, then I can get podcasters with a bigger list into the kit, and then we can have more people see Podcasters Kit is the idea. But yeah, the biggest mistake that I made was assuming that contributors here equal contributors there, and they're not equal. So I've had to change the way I think about it. I've had to arm my affiliates who are used to selling digital marketing with more information to help digital marketers see the possibilities in podcasting. So we can use their lists to drive Podcasters Kit to drive more people to learn to podcast. And I usually tell them the story of Bob the Teacher, which is his online name, but he was on our community. He was learning affiliate marketing. And one day he posted in the Facebook group that he was learning affiliate marketing on a podcast and he was typing what he was learning. And I was realizing at that moment that while he was mowing his lawn, he was totally focused on what was on his ears, because all he had to do was go back and forth across the lawn. Like, that doesn't take focus. Yeah. So somebody else was becoming the guru and the expert for him in his ears because they had a podcast and I didn't. So I've been telling the affiliates that you need to tell people that this exists. Like, your audience is on a road trip and they're listening to somebody else. They're decided to go to the gym and they put headphones on, they're listening to someone else. So if everybody could come up with a 7 episode podcast series on whatever your niche is, your topic, and you just talk about it and get people excited about it, even if it's like how to maintain houseplants. Like come up with an easy 5 episode, finite, the complete guide to managing houseplants and be in that space, be in the podcasting space. So somebody on their bike ride can find podcasts, can find houseplants and listen to you and be totally engrossed in what you're saying, totally focused, because all they're doing is mowing the lawn or they're driving to work or they're riding their bike. But you could totally be in their ears and you can change someone's life if all you did was spend 7 hours at some point in time just talking through the thing that you love most and making even a short, finite, 7 fixed episode podcast. And then you'll be in a space that you're not in now. And you might make friends and clients that you never ever knew you could, because in every other medium that you're in, people are distracted. People watching a webinar have kids in the background. Yeah. It's not like headphones or in a car on a road trip. It's just not the same. Podcasting provides this unbelievable chance for you to be like directly in someone's head, like right there. They're totally focused on what you're saying. And if you like to teach or you have something to say, I encourage you. It's the place to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like that's really cool. And I want to share something, because what you're explaining right here about like a short series around a topic, or sort of like almost like a free training, right? There was actually this company that I found through like Apple Podcasts, searching like lead generation or something like that. And I found this company called Lead Cookie, and they had exactly what you're saying. I think it's like a 5 to 10 episode arc of like how to do LinkedIn prospecting. And, like our business primarily offers like podcast post-production services. And I love spending the time with the team and the host and just being in the day-to-day. So for me, like lead gen and marketing and all of this is an afterthought, but I was trying to learn it and I found these guys and I ended up hiring them for like 3 or 4 months based off of exactly what you're saying. Like this, just a short series, how to do XYZ. I'm busy. I don't like it. I don't have time for it. I'm going to just reach out and hire these guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know Cliff Ravenscraft?
Uh-uh.
So he's podcast answer man. He's basically the first big podcaster. He's got 95 or so different podcasts. And one of the things that he likes to do is he kind of went back through his childhood and was thinking through, like his first big podcast was the Lost podcast, to go with the show Lost. And it got so big, like the cast was actually on his show. It became that kind of big. So he found like old Gilligan's Island. And he decided, I'm going to watch Gilligan's Island. I'm going to have the Gilligan's Island podcast. There's 30 episodes of Gilligan's Island. There'll be 30 episodes of this podcast. And then he did an old British show that had 7 episodes because he's got that podcast, like whatever it was, the Land of the Lost podcast. So he just takes these little moments in time and is like, if people like the podcast and they like the show, they'll probably search to see if there is one, and then it's him. Yeah. And then because podcasting is really a way for people to fall in love with you, not the topic, then he's able to say, hey, come over and listen to my podcast. I Lost podcast too. And people like him, so they move and they start to move within all his podcasts and hear the products that he sells. And it doesn't have to be like this big daunting thing where you think, if I podcast, I have to start today and never end, like every week forever. I have to have a deadline. I have to produce. I have to edit. Like that's just one way. There's many ways. You just have to open your eyes to the ideas that it's not a big hairy monster. It's being in someone's head at the time when they're most attentive.
That's awesome. Let's take a step back for a second, because something you mentioned about list building, I want to dive deeper on that. But before I do, I want to say like the value for me as a contributor for the Podcasters Kit for the second time now has really been the audience growth. Because, like we do have the course, it does sell, people enjoy it. But for us, the big thing is just jumpstarting an audience, because like you said, having an email list is sort of like the fundamentals of building anything online, right? And I know back in 2019, we were able to add like nearly 300 people. Actually, More, yeah, like almost 400. I think it's like 360 something people based off of this thing you put together, and they've become sort of the foundational audience for this show that you're listening to now. And I'm super excited for this week when everybody can grab their copy of Podcast Influencer Formula on the Podcaster's Kit, because again, it helps build our email list. It gives us subscribers and like people to push the content out to that can benefit from it. So I really want to ask, like, how can podcasters begin building their email lists?
Well, that's a good question. And I will say that the first year that we did BC Stack, I didn't understand. This was like the year where we just put a bunch of stuff together, and then they were pretty much all PDFs. And I didn't understand that I hadn't built a win-win-win situation. So it wasn't until the second year that I thought, if I make these list builders for the contributors, then the contributors get the list, the audience gets the products, and the promoters get the money. Like, that's win-win-win. So that means everybody is motivated to make it go forward. That is important for you to think about when you're trying to build an audience. And that is, what is a situation I can put my audience in where they would want to help grow the business? So, and that could be creating a course. So creating a course is basically saying, I understand you, Mr. and Mrs. Audience, and I know that you came to me when you were here and you're trying to get to here in your life. And I'm going to help bridge that distance by giving you a course. And in return, not only are you probably going to give me money, but you're going to give me your contact information. So you're going to help build my list. So in that sense, you can learn to get paid to build a list by understanding your audience and then thinking, okay, what is it that I can do to help them grow? And then the second thing that you can do is you can find opportunities like Podcaster's Kit, where my audience is the audience that you're going after. And that's the important part, is that you don't want to be in any kind of a bundle situation. You don't want to be just in any bundle. You really want one that is your exact people who are coming to the table.
Yeah.
Because some people talk about being authentic, and that they kind of talk about, like, you need to be yourself, as in that means being authentic. But for us, being authentic means the reason you exist should be the same reason that people get on your list. Like, those should match.
What do you mean by
So,
that?
for instance, if you have a podcast and you're going to give away a $25 gift card to Amazon, like you're going to do this big giveaway. Well, that's not authentic, because anybody wants the $25 gift card. They don't necessarily want to learn to podcast. So you'll get all these people on your list who don't belong there. And the way that dooms you in social media is all of a sudden you grow a big Facebook page, and Facebook sees that your engagement level is low. And engagement level low means that you're not relevant. And Facebook's job is to keep you on their platform. So they're just trying to show their audience the things that are relevant. So if you get a bunch of people because you gave away a $25 gift card, but nobody's comments or cares because they don't care about podcasting, then you've doomed yourself. You've basically screwed the pooch. Like, you're on Facebook and you get nothing, right? And I'll say this in a different way. You could go to a U2 concert and they could start playing their biggest hit, like even better than The Real Thing. And you could look around at everyone around you, and you were all singing at the top of your lungs. All of you. Because you're there for the same reason.
Yeah.
You could go to a club where they play even better than The Real Thing and look around, and you're the only one singing at the top of your lungs. Right? So now you're in a club with all these kind of like-minded people that like to go to clubs. But if you're singing U2 by yourself, you're not amongst U2 fans.
Right.
So Rachel's site, findingjoy.net, which has 800,000 fans on Facebook, she reaches 1 million a week. And her goal was to get 1,000 likes in the first hour whenever she posts something. And that's because everyone there's a mom. Everyone there talks about motherhood. Everyone there is entrenched in motherhood. There's no naysayers. There's no people who are against mothers. There's nothing. It's like going to the U2 concert and singing as loud as possible. So if you can think to yourself, who are my people? Where are my people? Then how can you get in a situation where you would grow your list with a joint venture? There used to be a guy who had, I don't know how this comes up, but he also had a lost podcast. That's weird. So he had a lost podcast as well.
Okay.
And he used to sell lost posters on eBay. He bought posters wholesale and he sold them on eBay. And when he rolled the poster up and put it in the tube and mailed it to you, he also stuck in his flyer for his podcast. So, and then it would be to come back to his website and sign up or whatever to get the episodes of his podcast. But he was basically saying, okay, look, if there's somebody on eBay who's buying a lost thing, they're probably a lost fan, and that's probably my audience. So how do I get in that spot? If you go on the site Unsplash, which is a place where you can get free photos, you'll see that the company ConvertKit has hired someone to create photos for podcasting. So if you search for podcasting and you find, you'll find photos of podcasters or microphones, and then you'll see that they were uploaded by ConvertKit. And when you embed a photo from Unsplash onto your website, you're supposed to credit the photographer or the company. So you're supposed to put in a link back to ConvertKit because they know that if you are on some podcaster's website, How to Podcast, and they have a picture and a link to ConvertKit, like they're getting in front of the right people with a simple link. I mean, it's just a backlink strategy, but the idea is the same. How do I get in front of the right traffic? So you just have to keep thinking that way. Who are my people? And even if like my people for my podcast I would love it if like the AARP, like if they put an advertisement in their magazine for Tracing the Path, because I think that 65 years and older people would really appreciate the stories from the 20th century. So for me, that's always on the top of my head. Like, okay, how can I do something with AARP? Like, what can I speak at their conference? What can I do that I would get in front of their people? Because then their people would want to join this community that I'm building where I'm talking about how the 20th century came to be.
Your experience in digital marketing, I feel like really shined in what you shared right there. And you've been doing digital marketing for the better part of a decade professionally. And my biggest question is from that, what would you say is, okay, so two things. What would you say is the one thing that's outdated that most people are getting wrong that they think is still relevant, but it's not? But also number two, what are some of the core evergreen principles? Because like you shared earlier, it seems like you really think about how you can build the snowball from day one, and evergreen seems to be a huge part of your strategy.
Yeah. So we'll start with Howard Stern. This is the second part of your question, the evergreen part. Howard Stern is this rock jock. He's on Sirius XFM now or whatever it is. But when you listen to his show, he will talk about women in the worst possible manner. He'll talk about sex. He'll use profanity. He'll have guests and they'll talk about like their first very, very lurid detail about their exploits. And every single time Howard Stern opens his mouth, you either become a fan or you become a hater. That concept should be your evergreen concept. Everything that you do should filter in or filter out your audience. So in your Twitter profile, if you write, I'm 32, I have a dog, married 4 years, like the Navy, great. Does that filter anyone in or out? Nobody. But if you were to write, I scour the earth for the best outfits for women over 40, like instantly, me, Dan Morris, I'm out. I don't care about fashion over 40, but women over 40 would be like, ooh, I need this. And that's just one thing, right? Your Twitter profile. So from a whole holistic standpoint, the thing that you should always be thinking about is your filter. I used the Amazon gift card filter as an example earlier in terms of it brings the wrong people to the table. But if you're Billy Graham and you're the pastor to the presidents and you never mention Jesus Christ, well, like, how do you filter in the Christians and how do you filter out the people who don't want to hear that message? If you decide as an entrepreneur that you're not going to mention Christianity, but that is really part of who you are, it's part of your business, it's part of how you live, then you end up filtering in people that maybe aren't right a fit to help you turn your business into a career. Or maybe you are. But think about your filters. Every single time that you speak, you write a blog post, you do an offer, you have a product, it should scream like I'm out or I'm in for the person reading. Yes, I totally need this, or I totally don't need this. So that in the end, Howard Stern has 1 million fans. Every time he got in front of 100 people, 4 people said I'm in. But 30 years later, that 4 is 1 million. And that's 1 million screaming, raving fans. That's exactly what you want, is these raving fans over time. You don't want just people who think you're okay. You want the raving fans. The thing that people do wrong, the old thing that people should stop doing, is sharing Jimmy Fallon videos.
What?
Like,
what do you mean?
Like, if you're the thing that most of these marketers are doing wrong is they're sharing other people's stuff.
Oh.
To create engagement. They're saying, like, what kind of carrot are you? Like, they're asking these questions thinking that their engagement goes up, because it does, right? Facebook will show that your engagement goes up because you show this Jimmy Fallon quote or this little video that everybody watches where he talks to Ellen, and people comment on it, and now your posts get seen. But what happens when you go away? Does anyone notice? Like, they're going to see Jimmy Fallon somewhere else. They're not going to care at all. Like, you're not making an imprint on the feed whatsoever. You're not bringing any value to the feed. And you're really bringing the wrong people to the table. You don't need Jimmy Fallon. You don't need the top 10 Halloween movies for October. You don't need to post that. Like, let Entertainment News post that. You need to stop doing those things and figure out, how do I create engagement amongst these people? Like, why are they here in the first place? They want to learn something. Talk about the thing that they want to learn. Don't just share a Jimmy Fallon video because people will think it's funny and you'll get some likes and maybe you'll add a page like to the page. And then you're like, ooh, I should share another Jimmy Fallon video. Ooh, that was good. I should do a quiz. Ooh, what kind of Disney princess are you? Like, these things aren't building your business. They're not part of the focus. They need to leave your business, because if you want to be the expert, then people need to be sharing your videos, right? You're not the expert if you're sharing somebody else's videos. You're sharing somebody else's articles. Like, you're one of the few who's pointing to the expert. You're actually making it easier for the experts because you're sharing their articles. So, for me, that's the one thing most people are getting wrong, is they're just sharing other people's stuff on social media for engagement purposes, but it's actually not helping them. It's bringing the wrong people to the table, and it's just filling time. And you don't need to fill time. You need to fill heads with awesomeness.
What would you say are some of the practical tips on how experts can be more polarizing to drive the right sort of engagement?
Well, you got to be okay with your experiences and your opinions. No, there's definitely a certain way to write things. You don't have to purposefully offend people.
Right.
But you can definitely say sharing Jimmy Fallon videos as an online marketer is not the best practice. Like, you should be able to say that. You should be able to back that up with your expertise. You should be able to tell people what you believe and where you're going. Simon Sinek, he had that entire book about leading with the phrase, I believe, and then whatever it is you believe, and then that's why I created this website, or that's why I created this podcast. Like, if you can say that, then people will follow you, because people who believe that same thing want a leader. They want to hear somebody else echoing the kinds of sentiments that they have inside. Like, it validates our own existence. Don't be afraid to be who you are with your level of experience, with your client expertise. There's no reason to be wishy-washy. This works sometimes and this works other times, or here's one way you could do it. There's a best way in your opinion. Tell people this is the best way in my opinion. There's a worse way in your opinion. There's the wrong way in your opinion. There's the right way in your opinion. I mean, be the person that you spent however many years living became. Like you have all these experiences. You and I will disagree on the best way to go about doing it. And both of them were great with
Right.
this right context, with the right way of bringing it about. It's just different experiences, but don't be afraid to share because other people will be like, yes, that's my line of thinking. I'm the kind of guy who wants to help people. And like Rachel, every single post that Rachel writes, no matter how sad it's like about anxiety, it's about like her ex-husband, or it's about when her son left. Every single one at the very end, as she sucks you in, she brings you back up at the end. Like there's always this moment at the end. And when you're reading it, you could read somebody else's and it's just like, oh, that's such tragedy. Or you could read Rachel's and be uplifted at the end of the post and think, I need to follow Rachel. This is the kind of stuff that warms my heart every day. Not everybody likes that. Great. But the people who do, they buy the calendars, they buy the quotes, they buy the recordings, they hire her for speaking. I mean, that's what she needs. And every single time she writes that way because that's who she is. And she doesn't downplay it. And sometimes I give her ideas and she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But it's a good idea, dear husband. Good idea. Thank you. But I'm not going to do that because she knows who she is. So just don't be afraid to be who you become.
I love that. Let's end it there. Thank you so much for your time and insights today, Dan. And for everyone listening, don't forget to grab your copy of the Podcasters Kit. We'll have a link in the description, and you'll get 40 plus courses, products, training, all from the biggest podcasting experts around the world, including our flagship course, the Podcast Influencer Formula. You get all of this for $47. And yes, that's 40 plus courses, not videos. These are entire programs from some of the top experts in our industry. And that's for only $47, but it's this week only from October 4th to October 9th, right, Dan?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. It was a good time.